All right, everyone, we have on Kelley Coleman, and she is, I didn't know this part about you, that you were a feature film development and executive turnaround author and advocate for parent caregivers and individuals with disabilities. She has an amazing book that is called Everything No One Tells You About Parenting a Disabled Child, your guide to the essential systems, services, and supports. And it draws on your experience of over a decade of advocacy gained through your own experience parenting a child with multiple disabilities. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic with you and just to really hear your story. And I know that this episode's just going to be a great resource for people listening. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me and entering into the conversations about all of the different things. I'm coming into parenting when we started as parents. We have a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old now. Our 10-year-old has multiple disabilities, and conversations about disability were just not happening ever in our experience. And so, of course, we were completely taken off guard. And I love having conversations that are just information. Saying the word disability shouldn't be scary, even to expectant parents, new parents, people who hope to become parents. Statistically speaking, it is out there and it is a thing. And disability is neither good nor bad. It is just information. And man, I wish I had known that a decade ago. We started on our parenting journey, our now 12-year-old pregnancy that's quite by the books. And he was, the easy baby that everybody's like, oh, he's sleeping, he's eating, he's smiling. And of course, we had decided we must be amazing parents because clearly we've figured this out because we have an easy baby. So no, it turns out we had nothing figured out. We just had an easy baby. Excellent. Should I start over from the beginning of talking about family so that you're not editing as much?
I mean, you can if you want to, or we can just start with your second pregnancy. It's totally up to you.
Okay, we'll just start with there.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, the internet seemed good, but who knows? So our second pregnancy was nearly identical to the first, and we had done all of the tests in both pregnancies. We wanted full information, and nothing was remarkable in any of the tests. There was no advance warning that anything was different with our second pregnancy, and our son was born. Labor and delivery was kind of exactly as we had expected. And it really took us off guard when from day one, I just had that intuition that something is going on. Mm-hmm. And he was passing the newborn tests, and the nurses were telling me, oh, you're just hormonal. There's nothing going on. Like, there's nothing wrong. Have some ice chips. And I'm like, I don't want ice chips. Like, I want to figure this out. And our son's journey with diagnosis and disability and all of that really got underway when he was an infant, and leading up to, his first 3 months was sleeping almost constantly. And people were saying, oh, isn't that great? And I was saying, this isn't normal. And it felt like nobody was listening. And we would have to wake him up to eat. And when we would wake him up, he would cry and cry and cry. And I know colic is absolutely a very real thing. And this felt different than our other friends' children who had colic. And it was very hard to get our son to eat. And all of these things that can be just fine, but started to add up to something is going on, leading up to the point when at 3 months old, he was hospitalized for failure to thrive, which can be a very broad diagnosis, condition, whatever your clinician is calling it. For him, it looked like he was eating almost nothing. And we're very thankful our pediatrician, after an appointment where I came in and told her how much he was eating or wasn't eating, um, she stepped out of the room and she got us admitted to our local children's hospital right away. And that started us down this path and into this world that was incredibly unfamiliar, that no one was talking about, and that all anybody seemed to be saying was how horrible this is and how tragic and oh, you poor thing, which made everything that much harder, because not talking about disability and not talking about what might be happening with our son made it feel like this is so terrible, we can't even talk about this. When in reality, he's this amazing kid, and we have our babies. We love our babies so much just because they're our babies. And then the last decade of our son's name is Aaron, the last decade of getting to know our son, Aaron, has shifted the narrative in every way possible. As we have figured out, we are often overwhelmed, we're often exhausted, but we are not inadequate. We can figure out how to best and support him exactly as he is. But the part of just falling in love with him for who he is has never been the hard part. And I wish I had known that from the beginning, that he's got a lot going on, but he's pretty amazing.
Hmm. I'm sure like a lot of those outside voices is the hard part. Like when they're telling you, like almost like having sympathy for you,
Mm-hmm.
and not like even like empathy or even just like knowing how to really support you. Um, or I'm sure just like even comments that you heard of like, oh, I could never
Yes.
go through that. And you're like, I didn't choose this, but
Yes.
this is the path that we're on. So,
You. Yes. And I think exactly what you just said is so important. When people are saying, I could never do this, I often say, actually, you could, and you would do this if
mhm.
this was your life and this was your child. And I think so often people are afraid to acknowledge the hard stuff. Um, who my son is as a human isn't hard. The epilepsy's hard. Some of the medical stuff is very hard. The paperwork is awful, but we all have a hard thing, whatever that is. And by saying, I could never do this, it just feels exhausting and invalidating to a person who just wants to hear, hey, how are you doing? How does that feel for you? That would just shift things so much if people are like, I'm going to check in with you before I tell you how terrible this is.
Mhm. Right, right. Yeah, very true. And that is really good advice. If you don't mind me asking, so like once he got admitted and all of that, like
Mhm.
then what happened? Like what did they discover?
Yes. So the being admitted to the hospital was both the scariest thing and the biggest relief all at the same time. And certainly, especially for parents at the beginning of their journey of getting diagnoses, figuring out what's going on, it is a lot all at once. And we'll back into that answer with the diagnoses he has amassed over the years. He has a yet undiagnosed genetic syndrome. And within that, diagnoses include autism, cerebral palsy, cortical vision impairment, um, epilepsy, feeding tube, gross motor, fine motor, sensory, medical, behavioral. Like he's like, I'm just going to check all the boxes. I'm just an overachiever. And he is a happy, healthy kid. And where all of those began, just before we had gotten admitted to the hospital, we did see our first specialist, and that specialist confirmed that he had cortical vision impairment, which means structurally everything was physically fine, but his brain was not processing the messages it was getting, so he had no vision. So we knew at that point that our son had no vision. And over the years, we have watched his vision develop to the point when he has a tremendous amount of functional vision. And in the hospital, the first thing was the feeding tube. We needed to save this kid's life. And as horrifying as it was, I had never heard of a feeding tube before. And they're like putting us on a surgery schedule. It was absolutely the right thing. And 10 years later, our son still has a feeding tube. And it turns out it's not actually that big of a deal. We started with genetic testing when we were there in the hospital. We started seeing neurology when we were there in the hospital. We were getting imaging of our son's brain. We were, doing all of the blood tests, the redoing the vision tests, kind of everything possible to figure out how we could best serve our child. Even though in Aaron's journey, there have been so many question marks all along the way, the gathering of information, it always seems scary at first when potential diagnoses are put on the table. We've had many things considered that haven't turned out to be the thing. It is always scary, but to the extent that we are able, if we can really view it as information, then we can take a step back and say, if I have information, I can serve my baby, my child, this human here in front of me. So hospitals are scary. The smell of hospital soap still takes me right back to that week and brings me to tears sometimes. But I feel so fortunate that we started on a path with him early. In his case, that literally saved his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know that you also talk about, you had mentioned earlier, just like the paperwork and all of that. And I think that there's obviously so much that goes into what you had to go through versus just like being in the hospital with your kid. There's the appointments, the paperwork, dealing with insurance, all the behind the scenes stuff that I'm sure could feel overwhelming at times. Could you talk
Yes.
about that a little bit?
Yes. And this is such a boring and massively important part of this journey. For those of us whose kids are disabled, parenting is we all know, a more than full-time job. Caregiving is a job in addition to parenting. And exactly what you just said, all of the stuff is a job. And no one knows how to call their insurance company. It's awful. And you're on hold and you don't know how to read their forms. And we were launched so quickly into a world of just heaps of all of the paperwork and all of the stuff. At the same time, we're just trying to figure out how to keep our child alive. And we also have a toddler who was 19 months when Aaron was born, and trying to juggle all of the stuff. I wish that I had connected with and leaned on other parents and other families who are in this situation much earlier, because we're all reinventing these exact same wheels. And by connecting with other parents, there's often a shorthand of, here's what is available in our state. Here is how to get insurance to cover this service that is part of your plan. All of the paperwork stuff, we need to treat it as a job that caregiving is, so that we can build systems and support ourselves in that arena, so that we can walk away from that sometimes, even if it is a full-time and forever job, like it is in my case. But to say, I've done all of the paperwork and the planning and the stuff today, now I'm just going to be a parent. I just want to take my kids out for ice cream or to the park, and I just want to be a mom enjoying my kids. And when we talk about and figure out how to deal with the stuff, then we can actually create that space to be a person in addition to all the stuff.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I'm sure, again, like so many people can relate to that, because those are the behind the scenes things. And I mean, parenting in itself is overwhelming. It's like such a crazy part of life where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I hope I'm doing it all right,
Yes.
and yeah, the added layers, I'm sure.
And the importance of acknowledging parenting in and of itself is overwhelming. And there is an amount of, we are making this up as we go along. And if all we ever say for any type of parenting is like, isn't this the best? I'm so good at this. This is perfect. This is great. Like, we are not supporting one another, and we're certainly not supporting ourselves, because we will hit that wall regardless of who our kids are, regardless of who we are. And we need to be ready for things to not go according to plan.
Right. So when you were kind of in the beginning with all this, what were ways that I guess people did show up for you that were very supportive, for people listening who maybe have people close in their life who, have a child with disabilities, or maybe they themselves do, but don't know even what to ask of others. If people are like, how can I help you? Is there anything I can do? What worked best for you?
So, what worked best for me varied from day to day and still does. One of the most important things that I'm glad I said out loud to people is keep checking in, keep making the phone calls, sending the text, whatever it is you do. Do not expect me to respond. It is nothing personal. It's not that I don't appreciate it or want to hear from you. I might be drowning in all the things and I can't make a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
So, first, just knowing that and leaving a message for somebody and saying, hey, checking in. It's cool if you don't want to get back to me. And then not freaking out if they don't get back to you, because they might not. And the people who said, hey, that sounds hard, or how are you feeling? And tell me more. I want to listen to you. That's a really big deal. The people who said, let me come over and not just babysit your toddler, who it's like, cool, we'll play trains, it'll be easy, and then you can hang out with your baby. I was hanging out with my baby, who was wonderful, but there was a lot of stuff, and said, I'll hang out with the baby. Show me the feeding tube, show me the medications, show me what he needs so that you can go out for a walk with your toddler. People, I think, often forget that I don't just need a break from my typical toddler who's running around. I also need a break from my baby who has intensive support needs, and understanding that that might be what I need in that moment. And people saying, I don't know what to say. I'm going to move because it looks like I need to plug in. People saying, I don't know what to say, but what I do know is that I want to support you. I want to be here for you. Here are some ideas. Can I buy you fancy coffee? Yes, you can buy me fancy coffee. Can I send dinner? Sure, send me dinner. And also, if you don't know what support you need, cool, I'll check back in with you. Let me know. And just being available is so essential.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really good advice. And I've heard from some people before, like the asking the question is good, but like also, like you said, just being like, hey, tomorrow night I'm sending dinner, or tomorrow, I'm
Yes.
dropping off dinner tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about it. So sometimes even just like taking initiative, can be helpful.
Or even saying, what's on your to-do list? Do you have something you need to return at the mall? Do you need me to unpack your order of medical supplies? Can I show up with a label maker and some file folders and organize your paperwork for you? It's okay to kind of figure out what they need in their life and to show up not just in the very beginning, but months later and years later. We found we had a lot of offers of help and support right in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And then understandably, everybody goes back to their life and we're still drowning in all of the stuff. And sure, we could ask for help, but we're so busy with all of the stuff that that even just feels like another thing on the to-do list. So keep checking in. People need that.
Mm-hmm. Um, what made you decide to write a book?
So this is the book that I swore I would never write, because the paperwork and the planning, and it's just so boring. But my background is in coming up with ideas for talking animal movies. So awesome job. Don't have any real world skills, but I'm a writer, so that helps. And I reached this point where I was working on a different book, and medical stuff really hit the fan with Aaron, and we were going through hard times and no sleep. And I was leaning so heavily on the systems I had set up and the checklists that were sitting on my laptop, and realized this is the book I not only need to write, but I very much want to write, because I have so many friends and there are so many people who I've not yet met who are in this world who don't have those systems. And we are all just reinventing the exact same wheels. And I'm so passionate about getting everyone equal access to information that we can use and that is understandable and that doesn't feel like eat your broccoli, but is actually fun to read. And I'm just so thrilled for other people to have the resource, because this is what I desperately needed a decade ago myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think like a decade ago, like if there was a book like this, you would have been diving into it?
Oh my goodness. Not only would I have been diving into it, but 100% my son at 10 years old, and he's doing great, he would be better off now than he is, and he's great, if I had had this book. We eventually got him the services and the specialists and the care and the therapies. We eventually got it all in place. He would have gotten everything sooner. And I think he would have gotten better versions of some of the things. And perhaps most importantly, he would have had a mom who didn't feel like she was just falling apart for years and years. Um, I needed systems that I didn't even know I needed. I needed to ask questions that I didn't even know were questions. And I needed a starting point rather than just Googling and making things up, which I figured out. But man, that's exhausting.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like how can you not Google when you're like
Yes.
hearing different words
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
I think just as parents, we go to like worst case scenarios and we go to it's like this, like, you know, you see something and you're like, oh, but there's this chance that it could happen. And we just it's so easy to like let your thoughts completely consume you. Um,
It
just
is.
in parenting.
Yes, it is with all parenting. You're absolutely right. And for most of us getting a diagnosis, we're given a name or sent down a path, and we're basically just like, go home, Google, and cry. Good luck with that. And that's what we do. We're given the information without a path forward. And most of what you find online is going to scare you.
Right.
And we need clinicians to give families, here's a path forward, whether it is a book, whether it is a local resource or organization, or even connecting a family with a hospital social worker who can connect them to services.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just sending families home without a path forward, we can do better by families by giving them a path.
Right. Being like, hey, while we're figuring this out, while we're waiting for these answers, while we're doing this, you can start here. You can connect with people here. You can read this. Like, yeah, I
Mhm.
can see how that would be so much more supportive than just, all right, we're just going to wait and see.
Yes.
So from like when you know, at 3 months, you got your son in the hospital, like how long did it take to eventually get all the diagnosis? I know you said there's still like one
Mhm.
undiagnosed thing,
Mhm.
but to get the care of plan that he has now,
Mhm.
how long did that take?
So His plan of care, like you said, is absolutely evolving and always will be. He didn't get an autism diagnosis until fairly recently. He got an epilepsy diagnosis at about age 4. He had the cortical vision impairment when he was not quite 3 months old. And cerebral palsy happened quite young in terms of our diagnostic odyssey. And it's been a years long journey for him. Something parents need to understand is wherever you are on the journey, you need to talk to other families and organizations about what services and supports are available in your specific state, in your specific area. Before we had diagnoses, we were able to access social service supports, which for us looked like different therapies that our son very much needed and benefited from. We're in California, and we contacted our state service agency, and their evaluation wasn't simply, does he have a diagnosis or not? Their evaluation was in-person assessment to chart where he was developmentally versus the typical expectations and the realm of what is typical for babies at the time. He began receiving social services when he was 5 months old. And again, still amassing all of these diagnoses. But because we were able to have evaluations done, and it was very clear that he needed services in order to continue to develop and to be the best version of him, we were able to access those very early. And every state has some form of early childhood intervention and services.
Yeah, that's good information to know too. I think a lot of times too, people do feel like maybe they have to figure things out on their own. I don't know. Were his providers saying, here's the state services that you can contact? Were they kind of guiding you in that direction, or did you have to figure it out yourself?
It was a combination of piecing together information. Our pediatrician did point us towards the state social services, and even that simple act that all pediatricians should do, but not all will do, was tremendously helpful. And our medical team had an amount of information. The vast majority of how we are connected with the supports our son needs is really connecting with other parents. And whether it is you meet a mom in the elevator on the way to physical therapy, or whether it is you see each other every week at feeding therapy, or even somebody at the park, not being afraid to talk to and connect with other parents has been a game changer for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that there's definitely, that's like one amazing tool I feel like that's come out of social media and things like that, is like different
Yeah.
Facebook groups, or like you find a mom on Instagram who has a similar story or is dealing with something similar, and you can connect with them there. Because it does make it feel like a lot less lonely. You learn things that like maybe you didn't.
Mhm.
And so I feel like that's an amazing tool that social media has provided us.
Yes, it is hugely important. And even like the specifics that you are getting into on your podcast, it is allowing families to build this journey for themselves with real information and feel like they are connected. And it is the same thing with all parenting, pregnancy, motherhood, all of these things. And disability is another one of those things. When we are able to plug in with others and with the community, and online absolutely counts, that we really can better serve our children.
Mm-hmm. Um, as a mom of a child with disabilities, how do you handle maybe like comments in public that people
Mhm.
may make? How do you navigate that?
So I love that you asked that, and not like, do people ever make comments? Because yes, of course they do. As you know, not all disabilities are visible. My
Mm-hmm.
son's disabilities are visible. That means he walks into a room and it's a safe and easy assumption that yes, he is disabled. The way he looks and moves and squeals loudly for the lettuce at the grocery store because he loves the lighting situation over there. Um, More than the comments, we get the staring and the like shuffling away of the children and pretending like you don't see him. And sometimes I just do a loud stage whisper of, we can see you staring. And then people feel real awkward. And I apologize, right? I'm like, it's cool. I know you see my kid. Um, we don't, much to my delight, we don't get a lot of people saying things that are not appropriate or that are disrespectful in any way. But I think what we get is a lot of just confusion of like, what do we do here? And my kid is staring at your kid's feeding tube. And so we try to get ahead of that and just assume that it will happen. Step one is talking to both of our kids about, hey, if somebody is staring, if somebody doesn't know what to say, if something cruel comes out of their mouth, one of these days it's going to happen. We prepare our kids for people don't know, and we need to take the high road. And we've also taken the position of not apologizing for our son when he's not doing anything wrong. For example, he can be very noisy and very loud. Maybe he'll make some loud sounds during a movie or when we are in an elevator and he's having a dance party and squealing and cheering, because why not? That's what we do during dance parties. Instead of putting the burden on him and apologizing for who he is and saying, oh, I'm so sorry, he's disabled, and that we used to do because we didn't know any better. And it felt uncomfortable and awkward for everyone. But now we say, yeah, he's cheering for the lettuce. Thank you for understanding. You know, I wish I could ask him to be quiet during a movie. This is quiet for him. Thank you for understanding. And when you're saying to people, thank you for understanding, I don't need to use his disability as an excuse to explain away behavior that someone else might find is undesirable. I get that he's loud. I get that it might inconvenience your experience, but I am not apologizing for who he is as a human, because I don't want him to grow up hearing that. I want him to be proud of all of the things. And my great hope is that more kids like him, more adults like him, more people will be out in the community so that it becomes no big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really good advice. I think in general too, we kind of grew up in an area where kids were supposed to like be seen, not heard. And I think that there's like a big shift. And like, I've realized even as a mom that like my 3-year-old's going to be loud because she's a 3-year-old. Like, we're not going to not have fun. Like, she's having fun. You know what I mean? Like, and I feel like our generation's like shifting some of that. And I think people are starting to get it more too, that it's okay for kids to have fun and to be loud because they're kids, you know, like I think that there probably might be like a little more understanding because of the generational shifts that are happening. And what I've heard from, I guess, maybe moms that I've interviewed or talked to is that, like you said, it's either like the hush or the shuffles, but that they don't mind when you ask questions. My 3-year-old, just recently, we were somewhere and there was like a kid in a wheelchair, and she's like, how come the kid's like riding in that? She didn't really know what it's called. I'm like, do you want to go ask? And she's like, no, like she was shy, but I like gave her the opportunity to be like, do you want to go ask? You know, and I don't know if that was the right move or not, but I've heard from different people that they don't mind people asking questions, and then but it still feels like maybe you can't.
I think none of us are really taught how to do the things. And exactly what you did is approaching and meeting your child's curiosity with curiosity. If we are all curious about other humans in a very genuine way, not in a like, whoa, what's wrong with your kid, but in a, hey, that's interesting. And we should never expect anyone to share their personal medical information. I have friends who are wheelchair users, for example, that people ask them all the time, why can't you walk? Why are you in a wheelchair? How long have you been in there? What's wrong with you? And they're like, oh, hold up.
Yeah.
This is like my life and my personal medical information, and I don't know you. So we shouldn't have an expectation. I think talking about disability, in my experience, might feel awkward to me, but for my friends who are disabled, it is not awkward. And if my child says, hey, that's cool, I'm curious, can you tell me more? Is such a different experience. And as parents, we can give our children language that fosters the curiosity. For example, my son's feeding tube. I do not expect anyone to have any idea what a feeding tube is. I certainly didn't before he got one. And that is the one time when kids and sometimes adults stare very consistently because it is a different thing. And medical equipment certainly can seem intimidating to people who aren't familiar with it. So I see a kid staring, and also my son is very social, very outgoing, and is delighted to share this. I'm always very mindful of his consent in any conversations that we are having. And because he is so outgoing and comfortable talking about the feeding tube, I see a kid staring and I say, hey, how cool is this? Do you want to see? By saying, how cool is this? They're going to be like, yeah, that is cool. What is it? And we're giving our kids language to be curious, and they can ask questions from a place of curiosity, as opposed to if I saw a kid staring and I was like, don't you stare at my kid. What they're learning is that disability is something to be ashamed of and that I can't be curious about. We're all curious about people who are different than us. And that is kind of humanity at our best, is being genuinely curious and caring.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone too, like I love the word curiosity, or like curious, because I think
Yeah.
just being, that's like a different way just to like, just even approaching humanity. Like we're all trying to raise our kids to be like loving and accepting and good people. And so I think telling them like, hey, just be curious about other people that are different from you. Like we don't know their life. We don't know their history. We don't know,
Mm-hmm.
what made them the way that they did, why they've made the life choices that they've made, whatever it is. It's, you come with a curious mind versus like a judgmental one, completely
Yes.
like shifts everything. And
Mm-hmm.
that can just like start so young with people around us. And yeah, not being like, hey, we don't see this.
Mm-hmm.
It's, okay to be curious, and maybe in some situations it's not appropriate to ask questions, but having open conversations with your kids, I think is so important, and having them see things through those lenses. Yeah, I remember even just like, this is very random, but somebody giving like marital advice once, and they're like, if I could tell you one thing, it would be to stay curious about your partner, because life's going to change and things are going to happen, and stay curious. Like, I wonder who he is today, or what's weighing on him, or what, like, like what's going on in his mind, what battles is he facing that maybe he hasn't told me about, like at work or whatever, and just like staying curious about each other, versus being like, why are you being such an a-hole today? Like
Exactly. And the why are you being such an a-hole today is judgment. And then it puts the other person on the defensive, versus like if you are genuinely curious, you're not judging someone for whatever their answer is. And it takes them off the defensive to give you a real answer. And if I were to say, hey, I see XYZ going on with you. If you are comfortable sharing, I'm curious about XYZ. And the person can say, nope, I'm good. Have a nice day. Or the person can say, thank you for asking. I would love to share. And it just lets the air out of the balloon when we're just not judging each other.
yeah. Um, before we wrap up, I want to just like thank you again for chatting with us and just kind of leave it open if there's anything else that like you want to leave us with today. I'll include all links in the show notes of where people can find you, follow you, get your book at, um, and be able to connect with you as well. So I just wanted to thank you again and open it up for anything else that you want to leave us with.
All right. Thank you so much for entering into this conversation. It is so important for us to view disability, whether it's in ourselves, in our children, and our babies, as just the disability is information. And ask yourself, what information do you need? What support do you need in order to be the best version of yourself and best support and take care of your child? Find the people who aren't going to give you judgment and tell you all the things that you should do, but really look at what is the support and what is the information. And you will be overwhelmed. You will feel inadequate. You will like go through all of the emotions. And rather than trying to bury that, just validate that and start from there. If you didn't love your kids so much, this wouldn't be so emotional, but you do. And because you do, you are going to be the right parent for this kid, which is all any of us want in our parenting journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as you were saying that, one thing came to mind was also like, even if you have to like put up appropriate boundaries with certain people in your life, that's okay too. Because I'm sure that there's people that are like maybe overstepping boundaries. I know that in motherhood, a lot of times we get so much unsolicited advice and it's people who just want to try to help, but people who are like, well, did you do this? Did you do that? And maybe they're not on the same path, and that it's okay to be like, you know what? Like, I know you're trying to help, but the best way that you can help me is by not saying this, or by not doing this, or just being like, hey, how are you? That's it. Like, I don't need advice. So it sucks to have to put up those boundaries, but sometimes like that can save your mental health too.
Yes.
When people are trying to tell you why your kid has autism
Oh yeah.
and you're like, thanks.
Good.
Right,
Cool.
right. So,
I love that you said that. Thank you for bringing that up, because 1,000 times yes.
yeah, and it's not fun at all. I hate trying to put up boundaries in my life because I like to say I'm a recovering people pleaser, but I view things as confrontation that don't have to be confrontation. I just build this huge thing up in my mind. And it can be really hard, but when it comes to being a mom and when it comes to your family and protecting your peace, it's so, so important. And if this person genuinely like loves you and wants to be there for you, they're going to get it. And you can say things in love too. It
Yes.
doesn't have to be like, hey, I got a problem with you. It doesn't have to be like that.
Absolutely.
How I make it in my mind. So,
Yes.
um, but yeah, it's important to protect your peace and to surround yourself with people who are being supportive. So yeah, that's another piece of it too. So I just want to thank you so much for coming on. Where can people buy your book at? And then I'll leave all the links in the show notes.
Great. So my book is available at all the book places, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, your local bookseller. And my website is kelleycoleman.com. That's Kelley, Coleman. And would love to connect with people. And I'm so thrilled to be contributing to your community and all the goodness that you're putting out into the world.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for coming on.